Wow, what a weekend of sport. Unbelievable stuff, wasn't it? I mean, goodness me, how much of it did you manage to stay across and watch? I managed to watch the British Grand Prix, of course, and then had to rush into the studio to get ready for our Formula E commentary, which is happening later that evening. In between times, the tennis at Wimbledon, the final went on to be one of the, in fact, the longest final ever. And of course, the Cricket World Cup ended in the most dramatic fashion, with England becoming champions. So well done to everybody involved in all of those. And then of course we went on to the Formula E race, which was another spectacular weekend, a double-header from New York, spectacular weekend of racing. And I just want to show you this clip that I recorded of me doing commentary alongside Tom Gaymore and Claire Cottingham, because I think the excitement in this last lap, or last few metres of the last lap really, sums up a Formula E season that was just dramatic from start to finish. Take a look.
But what's happening behind? Still everybody knows to tail. Degrassi nudging his way into the back of Mitch Evans. Tom, I'm sorry, I haven't let you get a word in. Go for it, mate. Talk us through the closing stages. Oh, crash! We've had a crash. It's Evans and Degrassi. Degrassi and Evans both out of this race. And the last lap, Robin Friends with 1% of energy crosses the line to win the race. And all of that means that Jean-Eric Vergne is the first ever back-to-back champion in Formula E history.
Well, that was a last lap collision, taking out 2 out of the 3 title contenders, Lucas Degrassi and Mitch Evans, and ultimately it all meant that Jean-Eric Vergne, as I said, became the first man to retain the title, the first man to take 2 Formula E championships, and that in itself tells you a bit about this sport, how close it is. We've had, you know, 5 seasons now. That's the first time we've had the same person win it more than once. And in every one of those 5 seasons, the championship has gone down to the wire, the final weekend. So amazing, amazing stuff. But before that, of course, well, let's quickly talk about the cricket, because the cricket for me was one of those sporting moments that I can only really put into the same context as when Lewis Hamilton won that championship in Brazil in 2008. For me, that was up there. When Man City won the Premiership, remember that year, I forget even the year, they took the title away from Manchester United with, I think, one of the last kicks of the game. And perhaps when England won the Rugby World Cup as well, remember that drop goal from Johnny Wilkinson in the dying seconds. So those kind of sporting moments will be the moments that live on forever, and it was just an absolute pleasure to be able to be across all of that sport. If you didn't like sport, you probably had a terrible weekend, so apologies for that, but it was great if you're in any way a sporting person. So that, I loved every second of all of that. I hope you did too. But let's get back to racing. The British Grand Prix, which kicked our Sunday off in a sporting context, really, didn't it? The first climax of all the sporting events. The British Grand Prix was a brilliant one. It was a stunner, wasn't it? It had a little bit of all sorts. And if you're a Lewis Hamilton fan, well, there he is. He was celebrating, and he drove an absolutely stunning race. Yes, helped out by the safety car. We'll get into all of that in a moment. But it was one of those races that has provoked so much discussion, so many questions. I think we may have broken the record for the sheer number of Ask Elvis questions off the back of this weekend's motor racing. So thank you very much to everybody who sent those in. Let's get into as many as we can. Welcome to another Ask Elvis. Right, loads to get through. I'm going to try and quick fire some of these to get through them as many as we can, because I'm still not going to get through anywhere near all of them. So thank you, appreciate them all as ever. Let's start with this one. Robert. Hey MP, do you think that RB and Ferrari, so Red Bull and Ferrari, finally got their heads around the 2019 tyres? Because the last couple of weekends they've been getting closer to the pace of Mercedes. Yeah, every Formula 1 team is learning every single time a car goes out. And even when a car doesn't go out, they're learning all the time through simulation, of course. But yes, Ferrari and Red Bull, particularly Red Bull, I think a large chunk of their performance comes from Honda. You know, the chassis has been good. They've done a lot of work on the chassis as well. So let's not, I think it's always teamwork, isn't it? But I definitely think Red Bull and Ferrari have taken steps in the right direction. I do still think these tyres are slightly unpredictable under certain conditions and at certain circuits. So let's not say this is how it's going to be for the season. I'm always very hesitant to take a result or a couple of results and then draw too many conclusions from it. But really, really great to see more than one team fighting towards the front. Yes, I know Mercedes dominated, but Ferrari and Red Bull, there is nothing between them now. We've got some great battles on, and there are definitely some questions around that too. Right, there were lots of questions around Sebastian Vettel, and these have been coming actually for a while now over many races. I've picked this one here. Costin Ionescu says, do you think Vettel is getting closer to his departure from F1? I think he's showing old school Schumacher syndrome, aka rear-ending others, which might lead to the end of his career. What do you think? Well, I don't want to draw too many conclusions. Let's not. And there were lots of people talking along these kind of lines that, you know, Sebastian Vettel has lost it. He's on his way out and he's a spent force. Let's not write off a four-time world champion too quickly. You know, the thing we all have to remember is that these are all humans, and every single human deals with pressure, deals with situations in a different way. Sebastian Vettel has had a lot to deal with because lots of it his own doing, but he's made mistakes. And the problem when you're at the very highest end of sport is that the media, fans, you know, all of us, we're all discussing it right now. That kind of talk, which builds into such a massive thing, and then the media ask them the same questions at the racetrack as well. As a driver at the centre of all that, you can't help but be aware of all of that external questioning of your abilities. And some people are mentally strong enough to just dismiss that, not even take blind bit of notice of it. Others, even if they don't want to admit this personally and openly, it will have an effect. And sometimes that will be subconsciously. We all know this because it happens to all of us in different walks of life through different things. Things that people do or say around us have an impact, whether it's a big impact or a small impact. So I think the situation with Sebastian Vettel is that he has made a number of mistakes, and I can equate it a little bit, not the same, but a little bit to the Roman Grosjean of a couple of years ago, perhaps, wasn't it, when the whole world ganged up on him. The whole world wrote him off. And fair play to Roman, he went away, he took some time away, he came back into our sport, and actually he did an incredible job when he was Kimi's teammate at Lotus, remember? Absolutely had some stunning results. He was at the top of his game. So it's possible to come back from these things, and I'm not even saying that Sebastian Vettel is suffering mentally. I have no idea. But he's got a lot going on in his life. He's got a lot going on in his racing career right now. He's got a young teammate that is all over him, and the world is talking about how good he is and not how good Sebastian Vettel is right now. And somewhere along the line that has to play some kind of impact, I have no doubt. But let's not write him off. I don't think he's at the end of his career. I think he's got another year on his contract, is the first thing. And I think that he would be crazy to walk away from that as an opportunity. Ferrari have a car that is almost the best. It's one of the best cars in Formula One. And that doesn't come around as an opportunity for a racing driver very often. So for me, he'd be mad to walk away from it. But of course it will depend on his personal situation, and none of us can judge that from the outside. We've got to let him do what he does. But he hasn't lost the ability to be a fast racing driver. He's had a number of dodgy incidents. He's made some questionable decisions in split seconds, and those are the things that somehow he needs to find a way to turn around. But it will turn around. He'll have a great race, he'll have a good result, and then perhaps we'll all lay off him a little bit. But let's not write him off yet. Frank Villoria says, I know Lewis had a slight vibration, but why did Merck want him to pit, knowing the risks were greater than the rewards? Lewis vetoed that notion, and it proved to be the right decision. Fastest lap to boot. Lewis Hamilton reported a vibration. In fact, he actually reported a blister on his tyre. It turned out not to be a blister, but a little bit of damage that was causing vibrations. Now, if you're the team on the other end of that radio message, and you're probably seeing those vibrations coming through the data, and you've got, I think he had a 22-second gap back to Bottas at the time. Loads of time. The pit stop, I think, was about 18 seconds. So plenty of time, even with a slow pit stop he had in hand. It was a comfortable pit stop. So that was the obvious decision. I'd have made that decision if I was on the Mercedes pit wall too. It seemed like the obvious thing. Take the risk of the vibration becoming worse, or You know, remember the time when Kimi had that vibration, albeit a worse one, but it vibrated the suspension to pieces on the last lap of the race. So everybody's aware of those things. I think Mercedes were trying to take that risk away, the risk of a pit stop failure, tiny risk, and they had a little bit of time in hand as well. So for me, it was the right decision. Ultimately, Lewis is the guy driving the car. He knows how bad that tyre actually feels and how much pace he's got left in the tyre's performance, and he overruled the decision. He took it upon himself to continue. Yes, it turned out to be, you know, a fine decision and got him to the end of the race, even with that fastest lap. So look, it wasn't a big drama. I think it was it could have gone either way, and it would have been fine for Lewis Hamilton. So I don't think we can say it was a dodgy decision. Matty says, I know that each driver is allowed 3 engines per season without taking penalties, but how many engines do the manufacturers actually build for the year? Well, that's a good question, and they all do it slightly differently. But if you think about it, 3 race engines per driver, so that's 6 in your pool straight away. You need at least 2 spares at every race weekend for each driver, so that's another 4 engines. That takes you up to 10 engines. Then you've probably got at least 4 engines running on dynos at any given time, so that'll be another 4. That's up to 14. Plus, you'd probably have another 4 engines kicking around as spares within the pool just for emergencies. So most teams, most manufacturers, I would imagine, are close somewhere between 15 and 20 engines per season, if not more than that, as the season goes on and they start to introduce upgrades and older versions become obsolete. Of course, then they need to replace the spares with the latest version. So probably close to 20 engines per year, per season, I would say, for most manufacturers. Kieran Walsh says, will there ever be a chance for an FE driver, Formula E driver, to get into Formula 1? Or is Formula E where drivers who can't make Formula 1 go? That is a very popular misconception, and I say that with some experience. That is, you know, Formula E is not a place for washed up Formula 1 drivers, and it's easy to look at it and say it is, because we have got some Formula 1 drivers, or former Formula 1 drivers, people like Felipe Massa, Van Dorn, you know, Jean-Eric Vergne. But look at Jean-Eric Vergne, he's just become a double world champion in Formula E. So he could have easily continued in Formula 1. He could have easily gone back to Formula 1, and there was some talk about that. Sebastian Buemi very nearly made it back from Formula E and back into Formula 1 a couple of years ago as well. And actually, on a technical note, Alex Albon has kind of done it, because he was technically a Formula E driver, signed a contract, was announced as a Nissan Formula E driver ahead of this current season, only to then be called up by Red Bull and taken over to Formula 1. So I guess technically we've had a Formula E driver now racing in Formula 1, but yeah, there's no reason why it can't happen. Formula E is becoming a highly competitive, highly professional racing series. The difficulty is, and the uniqueness of Formula E means that the driving style you have to have in Formula E is not necessarily a learning platform for Formula 1. It's not necessarily direct transfer of skills from Formula E into Formula 1. So a kind of a much more natural route towards a much more... Hey, shush! A much more typical or representative route is the Formula 3, Formula 2 type route towards Formula 1, because those cars are much more representative of what Formula 1 is. The tracks are very similar. You know, Formula E is all about managing energy much more so than Formula 1. So different skill set for both championships, but it's still racing, and at the end of the day there is no reason. We've got some unbelievably good young drivers coming through Formula E now. There's nothing to stop them heading on after Formula E towards Formula 1. Carbon247 says, Eddie Jordan said he believes McLaren will use Mercedes engines in the near future. Can you see this happening? Well, you've always got to take whatever Eddie Jordan says with a little pinch of salt, haven't you? But having said that, who doesn't want a Mercedes engine in Formula 1 right now? McLaren, of course, have got a Renault engine right now, which is ultimately, it's the 4th best out of 4 engines on the grid. So if somebody came along and offered McLaren or anybody else that hasn't got one a Mercedes engine, you know, you'd take it, wouldn't you? Because it's arguably the class leading engine, and I know that Ferrari you know, have something that's probably equally as good around certain circuits, But I think if you look at the history of that Formula 1 engine in the back of the Mercedes, the experience they've got, the development path they've been on, the bulletproof reliability that they've had, that's the engine for me to have. And yeah, if McLaren can get hold of one, why not? The management, of course, at McLaren totally changed since the last time they were partnered with Mercedes. Ron Dennis long gone, and the new management structure can build a new relationship with the new manufacturer. But for now, I think they're sticking with Renault, and it would be, of course, a third manufacturer in a very short space of time. But if they can end up with a Mercedes, I think they'd take it. Commander Omegon, Commander Omegon is somebody that we've given a prize to before, isn't it? I recognise your name, so hello again, welcome back. Apparently the new pit stop time to beat, because it was the talk of one of your latest Ask Elvis videos, 1.9 seconds, and it wasn't even that stellar pit stop of Max Verstappen. Hope you could see the race and enjoy it. I did see the race, I definitely enjoyed it, and yeah, I enjoyed the pit stops. What unbelievable, just look at that. 2 Red Bull stops under 2 seconds. And let's, while we're on this subject, talk about that stop. Max and Charles coming into the pits together. I can tell you that there is no better feeling as a race mechanic, because I've had this feeling myself, and it is amazing to come in behind your nearest rival at the same time into the pit lane, conduct a slick, perfect pit stop, and send your car out in the lead. It's just the best feeling. It's a feeling that as a pit stop crew you don't get very often, because it's all about looking at the timesheets and realising you've done a great thing for your team. But when you see it happen in front of you, when you see a place being made up, you could see it on the faces of the Red Bull guys, couldn't you? It was a brilliant feeling, richly deserved as well, because that was a slick performance right throughout the race from the Red Bull team. Well done to them. Jeff Macy says, what's your view on the lap 24 action between Leclerc and Verstappen? I wasn't happy that Max could go off the track and keep momentum to retake the place, as there was tarmac rather than grass after the curb at Club Corner. No, Jeff, I'm not having it. This race, we are not talking about stewarding decisions, other than the fact that they got them all right. That was a brilliant example of free-flowing stewarding, allowing the race to continue wherever possible, allowing hard, close racing, and not getting involved where they didn't need to. So I'm sorry, mate. I'm with the stewards on this one. I thought they got it all absolutely spot on, and that was one of the reasons that we had such a great race, because the battles that we had between the Red Bulls and the Ferraris particularly were so close and so prolonged. Going on for so long, so hard fought. Neither driver gave up. We didn't hear complaining on the radio. We didn't see the stewards investigating very much at all. I just think it was a great race for so many reasons, and the stewarding was a big part of that. So rather than let's complain about stewards, which we've done so much this season, let's give a big thumbs up to the Silverstone stewards, because I think they got it absolutely right in most cases. I mean, let me know what you think, obviously. If you disagree with me, tell me. I'm sure you will. James Taylor, how long do you think it will be before Ferrari promotes Charles Leclerc to lead driver if Seb continues to make rookie mistakes? And would Ferrari consider replacing Seb before his contract ends, as he's clearly losing points in race after race? Well, I'm not going to go into the Seb situation too much. I've already done that. But to go back to the first part of your question, how long before Ferrari promotes Charles Leclerc to lead driver? I mean, they're not going to do that. That's not a decision that needs to be made. They did say before the season started they would prioritise Seb in the early part of the season if there was a 50-50 situation. That was a sensible call, because coming into the season no one knew how Charles Leclerc would react in Ferrari colours. Seb was the 4-time world champion. It was obvious, it made sense to make that call early on. I don't think that applies anymore. We're into a season now where, I mean, realistically, neither driver is in a championship hunt. Charles Leclerc, on a number of occasions, is looking like the stronger of those two Ferrari drivers. Certainly right now, he's on form, he's full of confidence. Ferrari need to prioritise the guy that is running in the highest position for them on any given day, and I absolutely believe that's what they will do. I don't think that they need to take a decision to promote him as such. They just need to back him when he's having a great weekend, and back Seb when he's having a great weekend. They need to do what's best for the team, not for any one individual driver at any given time. Chip Hines says, if Vettel gets a 10-second penalty for causing an accident, could F1 consider giving 5 seconds or some other number to the other guy? In this case, Max Verstappen. No, and the reason no, certainly in this case, I don't think Max did anything wrong. That was 100% Sebastian's fault, so the penalty went to Sebastian. But what happens here is in the regulations, you only give a penalty if the incident is deemed to be either wholly or predominantly one driver's fault. That's the criteria that the stewards have to look at when they're dishing out penalties. So if they're saying that, you know, it was a split, you know, it was split, it was both parties were at fault, no one was predominantly to blame here, the answer is no penalty. We don't want to start dishing out and splitting penalties, saying 5 seconds here for you, 10 for you. If it's that close and that so many parties involved that all played a part in it, no penalty, racing incident, let's get on with it. Right, Roman Wazarab says, why, oh bloody why, does the TV coverage on lap 4 when Lewis Hamilton's about to pass Valtteri Bottas suddenly cut away to a crowd shot? You'd think Sky and the British GP would know by now how to broadcast a race. I want to see the pass live, not just on replay. Angry, Roman. Yes, well, we were all angry at that. Loads of people tweeted me during the race saying exactly that sort of thing. But let me just say, it is not Sky's fault. It is not the British GP's fault. All of those world feed pictures at every race, apart from Monaco, where the Automobile Club of Monaco produced the world feed. Every other race, FOM produced that feed. They are the same guys that have been producing it for years. Very experienced team. Not anything to do with Sky or Channel 4 or any other local broadcaster. The world feed, so once the race starts to when the race finishes, that is all done by FOM. So yes, it was really frustrating. I know it was only a small incident, but to cut away from such dramatic action to see the crowd seemed like an odd decision, but hey, sometimes you've got to take into consideration what a director is looking at in front of him in those situations. You know, he's looking at, he didn't know it was going to be a prolonged attack like that perhaps, and he's looking at a bank of 20 or 30 monitors. The crowd are going wild to see Lewis Hamilton chasing down Valtteri, and he goes to cut away. Yeah, we stayed on it way too long. It was the wrong decision, and I'm sure he'd admit that afterwards. But look, don't blame Sky, don't blame the British Grand Prix, and let's hope it doesn't happen again. Agam Shah says, do you think even without a safety car Lewis could have extended his first stint, then gone on to do a one-stop strategy and win the race anyway? I do, and I say that because I think Lewis was just on form yesterday. He was the fastest car. You could see how much Valtteri was holding him up at the front of the field and how desperate Lewis was to get past early on. And I think that yes, I think as soon as he got into clear air, he could have extended that stint. He said it still had a load of pace left, as we saw in his tyres. And I just think that the British Grand Prix crowd give Lewis a little bit of something extra. He's just so good around that circuit. He thrives off the energy that comes from that crowd, and it's a huge crowd. Very, very passionate crowd as well. If you were there, I think you can rightly hold your hands up and say, if you're a Lewis Hamilton fan and you were at Silverstone, you played a part in that victory, because he keeps saying it, and I genuinely believe it. I used to see it when I worked with him, how much he takes that in, how much he appreciates it, and how much it drives him over the course of this weekend. So, you know, as many of you know, I am not always the biggest Lewis Hamilton fan. Well, many of you actually always tell me that I am. Tell me I'm a massive Lewis fanboy. I'm not a Lewis fanboy. I'm a fanboy of Lewis in a racing car. I think he is one of the best drivers that we have ever seen in this sport. I'm not always the biggest fan of Lewis as a guy, but look, that's just a personal opinion, having worked with him for a long, long time. I do have a lot of respect for him as a driver, and I think that around the British Grand Prix circuit, Silverstone circuit on Sunday, I think he was unstoppable. So I think no matter what Valtteri had done strategy-wise, safety car or otherwise, I still think Lewis would have won that race. Data Kiss says, hi Mark, I hope you're well. I am, thank you very much. Just had a question about FIA scrutineering. What's the job of the guys with scrutineering bibs on that are in the team's garages at every Grand Prix? They seem to be locally sourced at each race. Also, how do you get the job? Okay, they are locally sourced, and they are scrutineers working on behalf of the FIA that are stationed, one assigned to every garage, or to every team rather, and each one, in fact there's one assigned to every car. And each one of those guys is there to monitor what's going on in the garages over the race weekend. Of course, there are large parts of a race weekend from qualifying onwards until the race starts which are under parc fermé conditions, and that means that only certain elements can be worked on the car, only certain things can be changed. They are there to keep an eye on all of that stuff. They are the point of liaison. So as an engineer working on the car, if we wanted to do anything, we had to tell him what we were about to do. We had to explain to him or her what the procedure was that we were about to do, bleeding the brakes, checking bodywork, whatever it might be. Just go through them, explain what it is. If there was anything that was out of the ordinary that we wanted to check or do, we would ask permission for them and from the FIA. The FIA would then come to the scrutineer and say, right, I've cleared them for this. This is what they're going to do. Just keep an eye on it, make sure they don't change anything else. Have a look at part numbers, seals, the kind of things that they have to check over the course of race weekend anyway. So they are in there just to keep an eye as a little bit of security for the FIA to make sure that the teams don't get up to no good, and also as a point of liaison from the team back to the scrutineering process at the FIA. How do you get the job? I don't know. I think they're all volunteers, but I don't know. You'd have to probably, the best bet would be to get in touch with either Silverstone, the RAC club, or F1 itself. But I'm afraid I don't know. Sorry about that. By the way, if anyone does know, if you're a scrutineer, or have been a scrutineer, drop us a line. Let us know. William Howard asks this one, and it's a good question. Lots of people have asked it. How was it possible for Lewis to get fastest lap on old worn tyres versus the rest of the top six? Good question. I don't know. I don't know the answer. I refer to my earlier point. Lewis was just on it, and he was desperate. He wanted the clean sweep, and that little something extra was what enabled him to do that. He was obviously had a little bit of performance left in those tyres, but managed to rag everything out of it, and that must have been a serious psychological blow, particularly for Valtteri Bottas, who had made the pit stop, the late pit stop, for exactly that reason, to get the fastest lap, and just couldn't do it. So, I mean, just unbelievable. That is a sign of Lewis at his best. F1 Nut, do you think Fernando and Ferrari could ever get back together? Ferrari need him. Vettel has lost it, in my opinion. Well, this is another Vettel question, isn't it? Let's stay away from the Vettel part of the question, but let's look at the Fernando part of the question. Could Fernando and Ferrari ever get back together? Personally, I can't see it. And Fernando's a great driver, make no mistake. But you put in your question there, Ferrari need him. Do they need him? Do they need Fernando Alonso? Because what you get with Fernando Alonso is a driver who can, we know, be very divisive. Believe me, I've experienced it. He's a driver full of experience, and yes, he's quick. But do they need somebody like that? They've got this young kid, Charles Leclerc, who is proving that he is the future of Ferrari. He's the guy they need to nurture and look after and develop. And so I don't think they need Ferrari. I don't think they'd want... Sorry, I don't think they need Fernando. I don't think they'd want Fernando, because I think Fernando would... The biggest thing he could potentially bring to Ferrari is a massive destabilising effect. And I say that with respect to Fernando. He is a great driver, but they don't want to upset the likes, you know, the balance that they've got right now. Yes, Seb is a great driver, as I've touched on. He will find his feet again, but Charles Leclerc, he is the future of Ferrari, and he doesn't need a Fernando Alonso alongside him. Right, finally, and this is another Charles Leclerc one. Jean T. Beard says, There's been a constant persona of quiet innocence about Charles the last couple of years, but we've seen today he can have the ruthless side needed for a true champion when defending. I think it's positive for his future. What about you? I could not agree more, John T. I think we saw something different from Charles Leclerc at Silverstone, which comes off the back of the decision that went against him in Austria, the steward's decision. I mean, he's talked about it, hasn't he? He's talked about knowing that if that's how it's going to be, that's fine. Now I know what we're allowed to do. I'm going to get my elbows out. I'm going to fight back. I'm going to make sure that I'm not going to be a pushover to anybody, let alone Max Verstappen. And that's exactly what we saw. And that is, you're absolutely right, the sign of a true champion. And anybody who's going to be Formula 1 world champion needs to have that streak in them. So I think what we're seeing from Charles Leclerc is a sign that, and it's very early days, but he is growing already into a driver that is looking like he's got everything. He still makes the occasional mistakes. We've seen those early in the season. If he can start to get rid of those, which he will, he seems like he's got absolutely everything else. So Formula 1 is in bright, the future's bright, isn't it? It's in great hands with the likes of him, with Verstappen, with Lando Norris coming through, Alex Albon even doing a great job and could develop further. So we've got some young guns coming into our sport that can set us up for a fantastic next decade. And if they're all fighting each other in top cars, we've got something to look forward to, haven't we? Right, I'm going to leave it there because, I mean, so many, honestly. I really appreciate them all, but I can't keep going forever. You can't watch this forever as well. Thank you to anyone who's still with me this far through the video. Appreciate it, I really do. Let's quickly get into giving away that spectacular painting from Maria Holland, donated by the gpbox.com. Loads of you took part in that. It seems so apt that we're giving away a picture, a painting, a canvas that is called Celebrations, and it's of Lewis Hamilton after what just went down at Silverstone this weekend. This is an absolutely brilliant piece of artwork, and I want one of you to have it hanging on your wall. So I have all of the correct entries lined up. I'm using a comment picker to pick the winner from everybody who took part. Lots of you sending some lovely comments about Maria Holland's work. It is fantastic, and if you don't win this competition, feel free to head over there and purchase something for yourself because it is all great. It'll all be linked again in the description. But let me choose a winner then. Let's hit the button. And the winner is Mark Bright. Let me just check. Yeah, Mark Bright, well done, mate. Congratulations. You've used the hashtag. You've shared a link of the Jensen Button acrylic artwork. And your comment says, "This is just awesome. Love the wet races, and this captures the feeling of that to perfection." Well, it absolutely does. Great painting of Jensen Button, but I'm assuming, or I'm hoping then, Mark, you are a British racing driver fan because you, my son, are taking home that. I will contact you directly and that will be heading its way towards you, where I would love to see a picture of it hanging on your wall once you receive it. Well done, Mark Bright. Thank you very much to everybody who took part. Thank you for all of your questions. I'm sorry this has run on. It's been a long one, this one, but that is symptomatic of how much conversation this weekend of sport has generated. I hope you enjoyed the weekend. I absolutely loved it. We'll get into more. By the way, this is video MP299, meaning that the next video is MP300. I had a very special video planned for MP300. It was going to be the Kimi one. I was supposed to be going on Friday night to go and have a chat with Kimi over dinner up at Silverstone, and for a number of really complicated reasons we couldn't do it. So it will still happen, but it's not going to happen this weekend, so it can't be MP300. So I don't know what I'm going to do for the next video. If you've got any ideas of what you'd like to see in the next video, obviously I haven't got long to set it up, but I'd like to do something a little bit different. So if you've got any quick ideas, ping them in the comments. I'd love to hear them. If not, it'll be just more of me talking about Formula 1. But anyway, thanks ever so much, guys. Have a great week, and I'll talk to you very, very soon.